day began with a message from my neighbor that carried the weight of a siren without the noise. I am Jason Park. I keep servers breathing for a living. At work, I move through logs and alerts and dashboards that tell the truth whether or not you're ready to hear it. Truth is a habit. I wish I had kept that habit at home as carefully as I keep it on the job. It was a late morning in San Diego with the kind of ocean light that fools people into thinking nothing cruel can happen where gulls are visible. I was in a stand-up that had drifted into the swamp where decisions go to nap when my phone buzzed. Mrs. Delgado rarely calls me. She prefers waves and smiles and notes about trash pickup taped to the HOA board. Her voice sounded like the moment a ceramic cup chips on the sink. She told me that 2 men had entered my yard from the side gate and used the back slider. She told me that Sienna had let them in earlier that week, too. She did not add judgment. She added timestamps. She said she wrote them down because patterns interest her and because she knows that I like clocks. I thanked her and ended the call and felt the thin air that follows bad news. I did not make a scene in the office. I did not tell the room that my life was on fire. I wrote a note for myself on a plain card that said, "Slow down and choose the right verbs." Then I closed my laptop, told my team I had a home issue to address, and walked out past a ficus that had never done anything wrong. Our house sits in a suburb that treats hedges like uniforms. The HOA likes letters and fines and narratives about community that are mostly about where to place trash bins. I used to smile at this. Now I saw it as an archive I might need. When I turned onto our street, I slowed to normal. Anger loves speed. Evidence loves patience. The side gate was closed. The camera above the driveway caught a strip of our sidewalk and the neighbor walkway. I checked the doorbell live view and saw my own face looking back. I felt a thud in my chest that resembled a nod. Inside smelled like citrus cleaner and a meal that had been cooked for 3. 2 plates on the rack and 1 set aside to dry. I moved through the rooms and found nothing out of place because Sienna believes in neat scenes. I sat in the kitchen and listened to the refrigerator decide when to hum. This is where you might expect a man to shout at air. I breathed. I opened my laptop and pulled the smart lock timeline. The house that once felt like a shelter became a spreadsheet that could tell me when it had opened its throat to the day. The logs showed entries at odd hours with guest codes I did not recognize. The pattern walked through the week with a dancer's certainty. 2 codes. Different days. Same windows of time. Wednesday afternoon and Friday late morning, almost always during my recurring sprint reviews, and the window where my calendar says commute. The entries were clean. Too clean. Guest codes set for 4 hours, then deleted. Whoever set them had learned my schedule and believed the house agreed. I checked doorbell clips. 2 men came to the door earlier in the week, one tall with a gym bag and the relaxed shoulders of someone who lives in a mirror. The other, more casual and smug in the way of people who believe charm is a form of permission. The gym bag man went around the side on later visits and avoided the bell. The casual man smiled to the camera the first time as if he were an actor waving to a fan. I captured stills and added times. The camera does not know how to lie. I wanted to call Sienna and demand the story. Instead, I wrote an email that set out what I had observed and asked for her to confirm which guests had entered our home and under what circumstances. I stated that all future communication would remain in writing while we clarified facts. I sent it to both her personal and work address. I set my phone face down and watched a line of light slide across the tile like a ruler. Sienna replied that she had hosted a planning session for a client. She said the men were connected to her events work. She said they had met to prepare for a local launch. She said I was overthinking and that a marriage needs trust. I read the message twice and then opened my banking app. Trust is easiest when numbers do not contradict sentences. I filtered for hotels and bars within 10 miles of our house. Charges looked innocent at first glance and unkind under light. A boutique hotel known for staycations, a gym with a pro shop, a bar where the bill grows long under fairy lights. I pulled statements for the last 6 months and marked the entries that refused to sit down quietly in my mind. I called a lawyer named Marisol, who had helped a friend make it through a divorce without burning his livelihood for heat. Marisol speaks in steady sentences that are allergic to fog. I asked for a consultation. She said of course, and gave me the earliest slot in the morning. She told me to gather what I could gather legally at home, to keep interactions civil and in writing, and to refrain from creating scenes that the other side could spin later as instability. She said that if there had been spending from the marital pot on an affair, then we would pursue recovery through a constructive trust and reimbursement claims. She asked me to bring the lock logs, camera stills, and bank statements. I thanked her and wrote the time on my card like a person sharpening a small knife. I did not ask Sienna to explain in person. That night, I worked late in the spare room and kept my attention like a metronome. She came home tight and bright. She knocked on the door frame and asked if we were all right. I said we would handle this like adults. She said adults do not snoop. I said adults honor the houses they share. She walked away and turned on the television loud enough to announce that she had an audience that valued her version of events. The sound did not bother me. The paperwork would speak later. Paperwork does not throw dishes. Paperwork does not sleep on the couch. Paperwork moves like water with gravity on its side. In the morning, I gathered documents and drove to Marisol's office, where the reception smells like a book that has not been bent. I laid out the logs and the clips and the charges. I told her about Mrs. Delgado and the way her words carried timestamps like spine. Marisol listened the way a builder listens to a wall before deciding where to cut. She asked about the men. I said I knew one through photos on Sienna's social feed. He is a trainer named Cole Bryant. The other is an old friend named Liam Perez, who runs in and out of our friend group like a cat with its own keys. Marisol wrote their names and underlined each once. She asked for job details. I gave what I knew. Trainer with a gym where family discounts require proof of residence. Creative consultant who leverages contacts in nightlife. Marisol proposed an order of operations that made me want to stand and salute. First, preserve evidence without trespass. Second, move all communication to text or email and respond only to facts. Third, request exclusive use and possession of the home on a temporary basis if interference or trespass continued. Fourth, pursue a constructive trust for marital funds used on the affairs. Fifth, notify employers or boards only if company resources were used, not as punishment, but to protect third parties from policy risk. Finally, Stage 1 controlled confrontation at home with a witness present, to put the parties on notice, and to stop the cycle of denial. She said to keep the scene small and lawful. She said to let them speak into the record of their own choosing. She said to leave immediately afterward and to let the law do the slow work it prefers. I left her office and drove to the hotel where one of the charges had landed. I asked for a manager and explained that I needed to verify an account dispute. He said he could not share guest details and that any lawful request would be honored. I nodded and asked whether the valet keeps manual logs. He said they keep both digital and manual for redundancy. I thanked him and left. I did not need to bully anyone. I needed only to tell the truth to the right person with the right badge later. Back at home, I examined the smart lock settings. 2 guest codes had been given names that looked like test strings. Sienna is not technical, but she knows how to ask a man at a gym to help with settings. The activity log showed that the codes were created from Sienna's phone while she stood in the kitchen inside our network. The deletion time suggested a schedule. I printed the logs because ink has a way of making denial look childish. I pulled camera snapshots and tested the export. The doorbell clips included a day when Liam arrived with takeout and left with a grin that had not been purchased honestly. The side camera that faces the walkway had captured Cole the trainer slipping through the side gate and tapping the code without pausing. He moved like a person in a house that he believed wanted him there. I drafted an invitation for Friday afternoon. I wrote to Sienna that we needed to discuss house matters at 5 and that I would appreciate her presence. I sent separate notes to Liam and Cole that said Sienna had asked me to settle a contractor scheduling issue at the house at 5 and that I would be present for a short walkthrough. I sent a message to Mrs. Delgado asking whether she would mind standing on her porch at 5 as a casual neighbor witness because we had had some confusion about access. She replied that she would water her plants at that exact time and that her porch has an excellent view of my walkway. She also added that her phone has a camera with a good zoom and that she is not afraid of paperwork. I laughed in the kitchen and felt the first kind shape of relief touch my neck. The hour arrived with the sky wearing the color of decisions. I set the dining table with a simple folder and a glass of water. I opened the blinds on the front windows. I checked that the doorbell had storage. I placed my phone on the counter within frame and left it. I was not a cop and I was not a fool. I wanted my posture recorded while my hands stayed empty. At 5, Sienna arrived 20 minutes late with a face polished for theater. Liam arrived in a shirt that wanted attention. Cole arrived in gym clothes and cologne that made the hallway feel like a locker room trying to pass as a church. They came into the kitchen with the energy of a group project that believes the professor will be too tired to grade. I asked them to sit. I told them that the house had been entered during my working hours by people who did not live here, and that this would not continue. I told them that the logs and recordings and charges were in the folder, and that I would be filing for divorce and seeking exclusive use of the property while the case moved. I told them that if they set foot in my house again, I would treat it as trespass. I told Liam that using my property as a meeting place was over. I told Cole that using my address for a gym membership discount would be referred to the gym. I did not shout. I did not curse. My voice did a job and left the room with dignity. Sienna tried to turn the scene. She said this was cruel. She said neighbors gossip. She said I had been distant. She said the men were helping with a project. She said many things. Liam tried a joke that landed on the tile and stayed there like a stain. Cole stared at the folder with a calculation that looked like regret wearing body spray. I did not engage. I said that further communication would be in writing. I picked up my keys and my folder, and I walked out the front door. Mrs. Delgado watered her plants and looked at me with approval that felt like a passport stamp. I drove to Marisol's office where I handed her the folder and told her that 3 people had just given me back my house by revealing themselves to be exactly who they were. Marisol filed for divorce on grounds that did not require theatrics. She requested temporary orders for exclusive use and possession of the home and for preservation of assets. She included a sworn declaration noting the smart lock logs, the doorbell clips, the side camera captures, and the neighbor report with dates and times. She asked for a hearing the following week. She also sent letters to Liam and Cole instructing them to cease all entry and contact. She noted that any further presence at the property would be treated as trespass and that law enforcement could be contacted if necessary. She included a line that pointed out gym policy fraud if Cole had used my address to gain benefits. She copied Sienna Council once it was known. The weekend passed like a train that stays on rails only because rails agree to exist. Sienna sent a series of messages that tried on different costumes: anger, tears, nostalgia, threats of public shaming. Then a new one that tried to recruit pity with half-truths. I saved them all and replied once at the end each day with the same sentence that said I had received the messages and would respond through counsel. I slept on the couch to keep the space between us measured and to keep peace with myself. The house did not feel like a war zone. It felt like a project with tasks to complete and parts to order. On Monday, we received an email from the HOA citing reports of frequent visitors during working hours and noise from the side gate. The letter reminded all residents about guest policies and quiet hours and the need to register recurring contractors. It was the tone of a school principal who wants to be fair. Marisol smiled when she read it and said that this was useful because it confirmed a pattern from a neutral party with an interest in order. We added it to the growing binder that I had started to call the spine. On Wednesday, we went to court for the temporary orders. The judge listened to Marisol's description of the events and to Sienna's counsel attempt at reframing. Marisol placed the lock logs and camera stills on the lectern without ceremony. The judge asked about the neighbor. Mrs. Delgado appeared by video with a background that showed no nonsense. She read from her notes with dates and times and brief descriptions. She did not embellish. The judge thanked her. The order granted me exclusive use and possession of the house for 90 days, prohibited unauthorized entry by third parties, and instructed both sides to preserve all financial records. A review hearing would follow. I exhaled for the first time in a week in a way that reached my feet. That afternoon, Sienna packed a few bags and moved to a short-term rental. She took clothes and a set of dishes she had always disliked anyway. She left the plant that I water more faithfully than most people water their own plans. The evenings took on a new shape that was not quiet so much as clean. I sat at the table and listed tasks. I called the gym and asked about the family discount policy. They said proof of shared address is required. I asked whether anyone named Cole Bryant had presented my address. The manager said he could not discuss member records with non-members. I thanked him and sent a letter through Marisol instead. I called the boutique hotel and asked for their process for releasing Valet logs to council. They described it, and I relayed it to Marisol. I called the service that had fixed our plumbing in the spring and asked for any notes that might mention who was present. The technician wrote back that he had been greeted by 2 men and a woman, and that the men seemed familiar with the house. He mentioned that one of them had opened the side gate without asking. Days collected. Work did not suffer because work respects a person who shows up with a tidy mind. I ran at dawn when the air still remembers the ocean. I cooked simple meals that idolize salt and heat. I learned again the way steam can teach a room to soften its jaw. I made a rule that I would not turn my kitchen into a courtroom. The courtroom has a building already. My kitchen can keep being a kitchen. This helped more than I expected. The discovery process began. Marisol requested statements and receipts from Sienna for the period that overlapped with the visits. The results were what you would expect when a person is careless with money that does not feel like theirs. 2 hotel nights within 5 miles of our house. Several late-night ride shares that began at our address and ended near Liam apartment. Charges from a bar that posts photos of couples under string lights holding hands over old-fashioned glasses. A jewelry purchase that shipped to a co-working address that Liam uses for his consultancy. A series of Gym Pro shop purchases that match the shoes Cole wears in his own posts. I did not care about the shoes. I cared about the card used. It was ours. Marisol prepared a motion seeking a constructive trust over funds spent on the affairs and reimbursement to the marital estate. She put together a packet that told the story without adjectives. The smart lock activity as scaffolding. The camera stills as crossbeams. The bank records as planks. The HOA letter as a city inspector sign-off. She also drafted a letter to the gym compliance officer outlining the use of my address for benefits and the reports of off-site sessions at my home in violation of standard liability terms. The letter did not threaten. It informed. Adults in charge know what to do with information when risk enters a room. Sienna attempted to preempt this by sending a group message to friends saying that we were taking space and that rumors are cruel. I let it pass like a weather system that had been forecast. Noah from our block texted me privately to ask if I was all right. I said I was steady. He said the neighborhood had noticed visitors when I was at work and that no one wanted to gossip, but that I should know because good neighbors warn. I thanked him without turning him into an investigator. Amateurs can ruin a case with enthusiasm. The pros at the courthouse need nothing more than simple facts written clearly and a calendar that everyone respects. The gym replied 2 weeks later. Their compliance officer thanked Marisol for the information and confirmed that the account for Cole had been updated and that any discounts tied to my address had been removed. They also noted that in-home training sessions off-site require special waivers that had not been filed and that the matter had been referred internally. The tone was professional and chilly. I felt nothing like triumph. I felt like someone had turned off a faucet I had not realized had been hissing. The boutique hotel responded to the subpoena with valet logs. The entries showed Liam picking up a car registered to Sienna on a day that exactly matched a lock entry and a charge to our joint card for room service. The image of his signature made my mouth go dry and then feel normal again. There is a moment in every long problem where your system accepts that the path is set and that your job is to keep walking without looking for shortcuts. I had found that moment. I tucked the logs into the spine and moved on to the next task. Mediation was scheduled as the court prefers. The mediator had a calm face and a desk that had seen wars. Sienna spoke first. She said I had been cold. She said she had been lonely. She said the men were mistakes that grew legs. She said the house had become a prison where no one made room for her son. I listened without letting my face become a billboard. Marisol spoke next. She laid out the pattern with the voice of a weather report. Activity at the lock during hours when I was verifiably elsewhere. Presence of 2 men on multiple days. Financial transactions that supported the inference that this was not business planning. The HOA letter, the valet logs, the service tech note, the gym response. The mediator nodded and suggested we focus on numbers rather than theater. We negotiated for hours in a rhythm that felt like rowing. Forward, pause, forward, pause. Sienna wanted to keep the house. I had exclusive use at the moment, and the judge had warned against disruption. Marisol proposed that I keep the house and that Sienna receive a fair share of other assets after adjusting for the constructive trust and for reimbursement. The mediator did the math on a pad with a fountain pen. Numbers moved like chess pieces until they stopped in a truce that did not thrill anyone and did not wound me. We took a break, and I walked the length of a hallway and back while looking at a painting of a coast that could have been ours. We signed terms that day. The constructive trust would return funds to the marital estate and then to me as part of the division. I would keep the house and the mortgage. Sienna would move permanently within 30 days. The men had no role in the documents, but their absence felt like a shape with edges. I went home to a place that felt less like a stage and more like wood and paint and pipes that do not care who you kiss as long as you pay the bill and do not break the seal. After the legal work quieted, the days came in clean and left with dignity. I cleaned the side gate and replaced the keypad with a model that alerts me when codes are created. I told the system to send me a message every time a new device joins our network. I adjusted the camera angles to cover the path that had been too generous before. I moved through the rooms and placed items back where muscle memory prefers. A spoon drawer that makes sense again. Towels that fold the same way. The plant by the window learned that it could trust morning light without apology. I saw Liam once at a coffee shop. He looked at me with a face that wanted forgiveness without the work of change. I nodded as one citizen to another and kept walking. I saw Cole outside his gym with a client, and he looked past me as if his eyes had found a better target in a window. That was fine with me. I have nothing to sell them. I have no time to rent them. I have a life that likes to begin early and end with a book. I recommend this to anyone trying to learn how to sleep again. On weekends, I fix small things. A door that needs a patient hand with a screwdriver. A cabinet that wobbles at the hinge. A fence slat that has shrugged too many times. Repair is a devotion you can practice alone. It asks for attention and pays in quiet. I invite friends for dinner without ceremony. We eat on the patio with the string lights that I hung for a party once and kept because light does not need an occasion to exist. They ask about the case, and I say it is over, and that I learned what I needed to learn. They ask what I learned. I tell them that boundaries are not walls you put up against love. They are gates you keep locked against contempt. When I run along the bay, I pass houses that hold stories I will never hear. Somewhere, a man is sleeping in a room that still holds the shape of a person who left. Somewhere, a woman is choosing to tell the truth to herself for the first time in a year. Somewhere, a kid is learning how to trust an adult who finally learned how to be one. I carry these thoughts with the rhythm of my breath, and I release them when the light turns at the intersection, and I head back home. Marisol called one afternoon to say that the final order had been entered. The judge had signed the judgment with the distribution as negotiated and the trust adjustments as agreed. There were no surprises. That was the gift I wanted. She thanked me for being a client who kept records like a second profession. I thanked her for being a lawyer who treats calm as a strategy. We hung up, and I stood in the kitchen and watched the kettle begin its small sermon. Steam gathered. The room felt reasonable. Later that week, I visited Mrs. Delgado with flowers that matched the paint on her porch steps. She laughed and told me flowers are a terrible bribe because they die and leave you with guilt. I told her they were not a bribe, but a thank you in a temporary costume. She invited me to sit. We spoke about irrigation and weather and why some vines thrive when you cut them hard. She told me she had known something was wrong the day the men walked in, like they were owners of a plot they had not paid for. She told me that people who borrow other people's homes to feel strong always forget to practice leaving. I took that line with me as a small tool for future days. One evening, I opened the drawer where the spine lives, and I stacked the pages into a box with other records that time will archive. I wrote a label that said house case and the date. I placed the box on a high shelf. I did not feel the urge to read through again. The point had never been to recite. The point had been to walk out of a story where I was supposed to be the fool and into a life where I am simply a person who knows how to set a table and lock a door and invite only those who treat both actions as respectful rituals. This is the part in similar tales where some loud flourish enters. That is not my style. I go to bed. I wake early. I make a list on a card and keep it in my pocket. The list usually says things like, call the roofer and return the library book and check the smoke alarms and text your sister. None of these tasks will sell tickets. They will buy me a day that ends without apology. That is enough. People chase spectacle because it looks like meaning from a distance. I have learned to accept meaning in the quiet chores that keep a house honest. I think about Sienna sometimes when the light falls a certain way. She had many gifts. She could assemble a gathering with grace. She could make a room feel like it had been waiting for you to arrive. She just could not accept that attention is not love, and that love asks for truth when attention only asks for participation. I hope she learns. I hope the men who thought my house could be an accessory learn that houses remember. Doors carry stories in their hinges. Floors remember steps. Cameras tell the tale even when no one is watching. Locks log the heartbeat of a day. San Diego seasons are kind if you notice them. Marine layer mornings and afternoons that decide to forgive. I plant herbs that pretend we live in a cookbook. I grill fish that reminds me that not all living things carry secrets. I wave to neighbors who do not know my name and to neighbors who know it too well. I think about what Mrs. Delgado said about leaving and practice it whenever I visit a place that is not mine. Borrowed rooms deserve careful feet. You bring only what you need and you take only what you brought. Work promoted me after a project landed clean. My manager said the team trusts me because I do not raise my voice when code misbehaves. I smiled because I understood what he meant. Authority is not volume. Authority is evidence and follow through. The lesson travels. I do not evangelize it. I carry it in my pockets like a set of keys that belong to doors I would like to keep. If there is advice I would give to anyone who finds themselves staring at the outline of betrayal in their own house, it is this. Do not perform. Do not invite a crowd. Write down what you know. Keep your hands open and your words measured. Invite the law to do its job. Accept that you will not win every small argument. Aim to win the day where the judge signs and the keys come back and the light in your kitchen returns to the color of mercy. I spend evenings on the back steps now. The side gate clicks shut behind me with a sound that used to sting and now pleases. The street is quiet. Somewhere a train complains and then forgives. The sky, even in a city that loves its own reflection, still remembers how to be a sky. I am here to watch it. And to remember that I am a citizen of a neighborhood where someone noticed and said something. And that this is how we rescue each other when the story in our living room begins to forget the truth. Weeks moved like steady tides. I learned to measure progress by the calm that came after a task was done rather than the fireworks of a fight avoided. My phone no longer buzzed with messages that demanded I meet emotion with bigger emotion. The house stopped bracing every time a car slowed outside. The dog next door resumed napping on the porch as if the entire block had agreed to share a sigh. The repair company for our HVAC system sent a reminder about a service check we had prepaid months earlier. I scheduled the visit and asked the tech to note any unusual signs of traffic or wear. He found scuffs on the side gate latch consistent with frequent use and a loose anchor on the slider where someone had reset the stop. Small clues, but they joined the chorus. Marisol added the service note to the record. Records welcome tiny voices when they sing in tune with the rest. I took a morning off to visit the clerk and request certified copies of key filings. The clerk moved like a person who knows that chaos is always just outside the door. The stamped pages felt like a ritual that had survived many storms. Paper receives power from the rituals that protect it. I walked out into sunlight and believed a little more in the country we live in when good people take care of its tools. Sienna attempted to pivot to contrition. She sent a message that used the language of growth. She asked if we could meet without counsel to talk about memories. I read it and felt a twinge that belonged to younger days, and then let the feeling pass. I replied that I respected her right to heal in her own way, and that I would maintain boundaries that keep both of us safe. Boundaries do not punish. They protect the best parts of what remains. One of the men tried to contact me directly. A short message that said he hoped we could clear the air. I did not reply. I forwarded it to Marisol. She sent back a template response that referenced the order and reminded him to direct any concerns to counsel. The silence that followed was the kind I trust. Not every silence is dangerous. Some indicate that a problem has accepted its corner. The judge set a review hearing to confirm that the move-out had been completed and that property exchange had been civil. We prepared by photographing rooms and making a simple checklist. Items were traded in a parking lot under a calm sky. Sienna took boxes labeled kitchen and left behind a stack of books she said had always felt heavy. I helped load the trunk, not as penance, but as a way to end a scene with dignity. We parted with a nod that did not promise friendship and did not invite war. I replaced the front lock with a new model that allows codes to expire automatically. I set a rule that no guest code lasts more than a day. I taught myself to notice the tiny thrill of a system that behaves as asked. This is what peace feels like when you are a person who loves infrastructure. It is not a chorus. It is a green light on a dashboard and a log that says success at the line where failure used to camp. On Sundays, I visit the farmer's market and buy from a woman who sells bread that tastes like afternoons I thought I had lost. She asks how the house is. I say the house is learning to be a home again. She nods as if houses are people. Maybe they are. They contain us. They hear us. They remember the day we decide to stop lying to ourselves and to others. Friends from work invited me to a pickup game at a park near Balboa. I played as if my body had been waiting for an invitation back into its own life. We argued calls with smiles and ended with tacos from a stand that knows how to feed people who have used their legs for a good reason. I went home and slept without a single rehearsal of old scenes. A letter arrived from the HOA confirming that the earlier reports had been resolved. They thanked residents for their cooperation and quietly reminded everyone to respect access rules. It read like a weather bulletin that declares a storm over and asks people to sweep sidewalks. I like the phrase resolve. It does not pretend anyone was pure. It says only that the file can be closed. I sat with Marisol one last time to review the accounting of the Constructive Trust. Every dollar had a story, and each story now had a receipt that put it back where it belonged. I signed a final acknowledgement, and she filed it. She asked how I planned to mark the end. I said I would replace the side gate latch with a heavier one and grill fish. She said that sounded perfect and asked for the marinade recipe. I told her lemon and patience. The gym sent a follow-up noting that Cole had been suspended for a brief period and that off-site training rules had been clarified in a memo to all staff and contractors. The memo included clear language about addresses, liability, and respect for client boundaries. I wondered how many hard lessons become policy for future strangers. I hoped this one would save someone a night like the one I had endured. Liam moved to another neighborhood. A mutual friend reported that he had told people he needed a fresh start and that the gossip had become inconvenient. Fresh starts deserve no sarcasm from me. If he uses his fresh start to grow, then good. If he uses it to repeat, the world will deliver another envelope. Either way, it is not my project. At odd moments, I felt echoes. The sound of the side gate when the wind catches it. The shape of two shadows at dusk. These echoes did not command me. They visited like distant relatives who have learned to call ahead. I let them tell me what they needed to tell me, and then I sent them on their way with tasks to do that required my attention now. Dishes, a run, a call to my sister. The body loves work. Work frees the mind. The final walkthrough of the house happened on a Saturday morning with a volunteer from a local mediation clinic present to observe. We moved room to room with a checklist and small stickers for items that needed to stay or go. The volunteer thanked us for being civil. I said civility can be a skill, not a mood. She said she wished more people learned it before they met her. We both laughed softly and kept moving. I began to host small dinners. Not parties. Dinners where 3 people can share a bottle and the conversation does not have to audition for the internet. I cooked stews that improve if you let them think overnight. I set plates that match by accident. I played music that does not ask for attention. My friends told me the house felt like a person who has begun to heal. I believed them because the floor under my feet agreed. Sometimes I still see a pair of footprints in the side yard where the dirt never settled right. I cover them with fresh soil and press down with my heel. The mark fades. The ground accepts the correction. It teaches me a small lesson about maintenance that I apply to the rest of my life. Fix small things quickly. Do not let ruts impersonate roads. Work brought a new hire who reminded me of my younger self. Eager, careful with details, unwilling to pretend to understand when he did not. I mentored him without turning him into a mirror. We solved an outage one night that would have eaten us alive a year ago. He asked how I stayed so calm. I told him the truth. Calm is a habit that you can practice the same way you practice lifting anything. Reps matter. Mrs. Delgado organized a block cleanup. We trimmed hedges, painted a fence, and picked up litter washed down by a storm. She gave me a pair of gloves and told me I worked like someone who has learned to use both hands. I told her I'm trying. She patted my shoulder and pointed me toward a patch of ivy that had begun to believe itself immortal. I tugged, and the ivy discovered it had roots, but not rights. I cleared the last of the boxes Sienna had left in the garage. Inside, I found a camera from early in our marriage with photos of trips we had taken when life seemed eager to align. I did not hold a trial in my head about which moments were lies. Photos capture light, not contracts. I put the camera in a drawer and kept the best prints on a small shelf because the joy was real, even if the later chapters were not. On the first day of spring that felt honest, I painted the side gate. The brush carried color into the wood grain with a tenderness that felt like instruction. Do not rush. Always cut in at the edges first. Step back often to see the whole. I thought about how those rules hold for more than wood and paint. A neighbor walking a small dog complimented the new look and asked if I was taking clients. I said I only accept one, and that he lives here. There was a weekend market downtown where artisans sold goods under tents that tried to imitate the patience of trees. I bought a clay bowl from a woman whose hands recorded the history of her craft better than any biography. The bowl sits by my keys and receives the metal with a soft chime each night. Little rituals mark the border between public and private. The bowl has become my border guard. When the judgment finalized, I took a drive along the coast. The horizon presented a straight line that no one had drawn and yet exists. That line calmed me. I turned inland when the sunlight decided it had flattered me enough for one day. I stopped for fish tacos and ate them at a picnic table alone, without feeling alone. Seagulls lobbied for a share, and I told them the vote was closed. They understood and moved on to a family who had not closed theirs. A friend asked if I planned to date. I said, I plan to build a house that can host truth. If someone arrives who knows how to knock with respect, I will open the door. If not, the living room will not notice because it will be busy being a living room. He said that sounded like a plan, and I said it sounded like a lack of a plan, and that this is exactly the right size for this season. My mother visited and brought kimchi that bites with kindness. She looked around and sniffed the air and told me in her way that the house had decided to like me again. She sat by the window and told me a story about a neighbor from her childhood who used to keep a ledger of favors owed and favors granted. She said the woman died with a balanced book and that the town spoke of her with respect. I decided that is how I want to leave any room I enter. Balanced. On a short trip for work, I found myself in a hotel that smelled like air freshener and promises. The bed was fine. The coffee was not. I wrote notes for a talk and thought about the difference between a fresh start and a clean slate. You do not get a clean slate. You get a slate with old chalk, and you write around it until the writing becomes a song, and the old marks become context instead of destiny. A stranger on the train asked about the book in my hand. We spoke for 2 stops and then returned to our private worlds. That is the level of intimacy I crave most days now. Brief and kind and without a plot twist. I have had enough twist for a while. Marisol sent a holiday card with a line about light finding its way through cracks. I placed it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a small house. Each time I open the door, I see the card and the magnet, and I feel a human chain extending from my kitchen to an office, where a woman with a calm voice helped me cross a river. I received an email from the service tech who had written the note months ago. He said he had switched companies and wanted to thank me for being respectful during a rough day. He said customers help workers survive their jobs more than they know. I replied with gratitude and a wish for him to land in rooms that treat him well. Courtesy moving through the world is a form of quiet currency. One afternoon, I returned from a run to find a small package at my door. Inside was a note from Mrs. Delgado with a keychain carved from wood. The carving showed a simple house outline with a sturdy door. Her note said, "May your doors open for peace and close for trouble." I attached the keychain and felt fortified, as if the small carving had added a few inches to my spine. I tuned up my bike and rode through the canyons where the light changes without asking for permission. Movement remains the best teacher I have. The body explains things the mind refuses to hear if you give it a hill and tell it to go. I returned with dust on my calves and a grin that felt like a signature I had forgotten how to write. A barista wrote my name with an extra letter, and I laughed instead of correcting him. Perfection is a myth that hurt me when I expected it from a life that never promised anything beyond the chance to try again tomorrow. I tipped high and carried the cup outside like a small trophy from a game I did not have to win. The seasons turned, and the house did not betray me. It creaked when the air cooled and stretched when the heat returned. It asked so little. A swept floor, a paid bill, a hand on the banister when you take the stairs at night. I keep my end of the agreement. It keeps me warm and sheltered and private. That is love enough for now. I began keeping a notebook by the bed where I write a single sentence each night about something real that happened that day. Not big, real. A child laughed on the sidewalk. A code deploy went out without alarms. The moon looked like a coin you could not spend. The notebook is a ledger of ordinary grace. It keeps my mind from courting the drama that once introduced itself as meaning. In time, the case faded from conversation. New dramas auditioned for the neighborhood stage. I watched them with respectful distance. Everyone gets their turn with the wind. When mine visits again, I hope I remember the tools that worked. Paper, patience, boundaries. Friends who do not audition for my approval because they already have it by showing up with food and silence. On a warm night in late summer, I hosted a small gathering on the patio. We grilled and talked. Someone brought a guitar and played softly without asking for applause. The side gate stayed closed except for the neighbor who came through with a bowl of citrus from her tree. She asked if I needed anything, and I told her I had everything I needed for this hour. The hour agreed by not running away too fast. I sometimes drive past the gym and see people pushing against heavy things in the hope of shaping themselves into a story they can respect. I do not judge that. I prefer another approach now. I shape my story by keeping promises to myself that require no audience. Wake early, pay bills, return the cart, call your people, lock the door, water the plant, invite peace. This list is enough to fill a life. When the first autumn rain arrived, the scent of wet pavement on my street reached through memory and pulled out a day from childhood when my father taught me how to check a bike chain. He said tools will respect you if you respect them. I did not understand then that a ledger and a lock and a letter are also tools. Now I do. I feel a rush of quiet gratitude for the people who placed tools in my hands before I knew what they were for. A coworker confided that he suspected his partner of lying about small things. He asked for scripts. I told him I do not offer scripts. I offer habits. Write down what you know. Keep emotions from drafting your emails. Invite a professional when stakes rise. He nodded and said he had hoped for something easier. I said I had hoped for something easier too. And here we both were, still standing. I met a couple at the market who had just moved into the neighborhood. They asked about HOA rules and whether the letters were as stern as people said. I told them the letters were stern and also useful. I said, get on the good side of the woman who runs the board, and your holidays will go smoother. They laughed and promised to introduce themselves. I imagined them years from now, telling new arrivals the same thing, and I felt part of a small river that feeds the larger one. On the highway one afternoon, a driver cut me off hard enough to invite a chase. I felt the old fire begin its speech. I turned down an exit instead and let the moment pass into the land where nobody lives. I will not bring that driver into my kitchen. I will not carry him to my pillow. He can live his life without renting space in mine. A small gallery downtown hosted an exhibit of street photos. One image showed a woman pulling a suitcase while rain stitched the scene together. The title read simply, Leaving. I stood in front of it longer than I meant to, and then I bought a postcard print and pinned it near the door. The print reminds me that leaving can be a skill, and that I now have it. I planted rosemary near the steps, and it decided to thrive with the kind of confidence I aspire to. Bees arrived and worked without ceremony. I watched them long enough to forget time and then remembered a task I had promised myself I would finish before lunch. I finished it. The bees continued their shift, as if I were a background extra in a film they were producing. News arrived that a case like mine had gone viral with a video that made a husband look like a hero for an hour. The comments multiplied, like hungry birds. I watched for 2 minutes and closed the tab. Strangers do not pay your bills or hold your hand at the clerk window. They throw confetti that dissolves in the first rain. I prefer the kind of praise that looks like a healthy spreadsheet. At dusk, the windows catch light and throw it back inside. I sometimes stand in that light and count the honorable tasks I completed that day. Not many. Enough. A contract reviewed, a meal cooked, a call returned. Walking away from what does not serve me, returning to what does. There is no music behind these moments, and yet they hum. I try to keep a promise to myself to notice 3 true things each day before I allow a screen to speak. The scent of rain on concrete, the slight grind in a cabinet door that tells me the hinge wants oil, the sound of a bus braking 3 blocks away. These truths steady me for the taller stories that try to climb onto my back later. On a weekend drive through the hills, I stopped at a viewpoint and listened to a family argue about maps. The father wanted one route. The mother wanted another. The child wanted a snack. It felt like a small poem about how most of life goes. I wished them safe travels in my mind and walked back to my car with a new respect for snacks. Sundays in my neighborhood have a slow drumbeat that begins with sprinklers and ends with grills. I set a chair in the patch of shade that moves like a sundial, and I read a few pages of a book that refuses to hurry. The mind thanks me by returning to its post without complaint on Monday. I asked my sister what she remembers most from our childhood home. She said the sound of our mother washing rice, that soft rush, that sure motion. I bought a new colander and tried to honor that motion. My kitchen felt older and kinder with that sound in it. I sent a note to the property manager at the boutique hotel thanking them for the orderly response to the subpoena. People rarely write thanks to the gears that keep the larger machine respectful. He replied with a brief line saying it was his job and that clarity helps everyone. I archived the exchange with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes I wake in the night and the house is so still that I can hear the clock in the hall narrate the seconds. I tell myself this is not a signal of danger. It is a reminder that even in the dark, The world keeps gentle time. I accept the reminder and sleep again. I have learned to keep watering cans filled. An empty can makes a plant into an obligation. A full can makes watering into a small pleasure. Preparation turns chores into rituals. I try to apply this to the rest of my life where possible. When I pass the side gate now, I touch the wood as if to thank it for holding the line. Boundaries are a kindness to the self and to others. They tell everyone where the stage ends and the seats begin. I wish more of us learned this early.